Visionaries is proud to present our 23rd season on public television. This is the story of how one of the worst child care systems in the country became one of the best, demonstrating what can happen when tenacious legal advocates sit down together with public officials committed to doing the right thing. We think of the law as adversarial, litigants battling it out in court with one side winning and the other losing. This is a very different story. It's about using the law as a tool to fight for and protect thousands of children for generations to come. Children's Rights is a national nonprofit organization that uses relentless strategic advocacy and legal action to prevent harm to children.
My name is Jasmine Howard, and right now I'm in nursing school.
My name is Kiara Nash, and I'm a full-time student.
Well, my name is Kendra McMullen. I have two lovely daughters by the name of Leah Watts and Genesis Nunn.
We see children's issues as one of the most pressing civil rights campaigns. And we draw on the civil rights movement of the 1960s. We're very inspired by that. We believe that advocacy is what you need to hold government accountable. And sometimes that advocacy has to take the form of going into a courtroom and showing that a state is doing harm to some of its citizens. In this case, some of your most vulnerable citizens.
We go now to Tennessee, just one of the many places across America where children's rights has had lasting impact.
This work is about government accountability for maybe the most vulnerable population one could imagine. Kids who are in some kind of crisis or instability in their homes. They've experienced trauma, they've been removed, they've been thrust into a system that's designed to care for and protect them that's broken and isn't doing that. And there's no one to speak for them. They don't vote, they don't have a political constituency.
I came in contact with the Department of Children's Services at 2 years old, so it's been a journey.
I had trauma throughout most of my childhood life, from being molested to being beat up by my uncle, being homeless.
Well, my foster care experience, it began when I was 14 years old. My sisters and I, we came into custody because at the time I was carrying a child by my abuser. It was a close relative of the family. He just, invaded my room, and then a few months later, I was pregnant.
In Tennessee before 1998, vulnerable children were placed in institutions and shuttled around, often to 10 or more placements. They suffered trauma unnecessarily.
We're at the Tennessee Preparatory School in Nashville, Tennessee.
We had 1,500 kids in the same facility. They had special school, they had special medical care. They slept in kind of barracks type location.
They grew up on this campus. They lived on this campus in these cottages. They went to middle school and high school on this campus. Their whole world was this campus.
The system itself was actually re-victimizing the kids it was supposed to protect.
Before I came into foster care, I was at a group home. So it kind of felt like an institution. I felt like the group home wasn't a place for me. I felt confined, I felt like the people didn't care as much.
We collect outcome data on every young person that leaves our program. We contact that young person, their family, after they've completed our program at 6, 12, and 24 months. So we know what's happened to them. And what we found in the late 80s, early 90s especially, the young people that stayed in our programs the longest did the worst after they left us. The young people that we believe would do the best living in our residential programs did the worst years later.
It was a difficult battle. I mean, the system in Tennessee, as Leonard well knows, it was terrible. It was really a terrible system. We had a lot of kids in emergency shelters.
We had kids sleeping in offices. Yep. We found that many of the workers didn't have a placement for them. We didn't have enough resources.
So when you dig through the original court filing, and you begin to read and uncover the stories of these children, and you begin to understand that a child 3, 5, 13, 17 years old has been in unnecessary and unsuitable confinement, quite frankly, that has been separated from their siblings, unable to see them, in many cases, that have been raped or physically abused or warehoused in spaces that were not for anyone, let alone young children, and that in fact they were moved not 5 times or 10 times or 15 times or 20 times, but oftentimes more. What would it be like for an actual human being to have experienced move after move after move? How does one justify that?
I actually stayed in one foster home for about 10 years, and I remember moving for maybe like 1 year after that. And then I went back to foster care for another maybe 5, 6 years, and then I started bouncing back and forth again. So it was horrible. I was basically like cleaning up, as a slave. As far as like physical abuse, I was beat with extension cords. It was just horrible.
Her social worker brought her here when she was 3 days old. And I never saw another social worker. They just left her here. It took a long time until I got in touch with Iris to get any help for her.
I'm not sure the state ever really admitted that it had a problem, which I think is the first thing that I tried to do, was say, we got a problem here, and a lot of states had the problem, in my opinion, of just accepting on a leadership basis the thought that maybe there is something wrong here with the way we're providing services to kids and families.
From 1980 to 1994, we believed that families were the primary source of the problem. But after collecting data and looking at our own research as well as others, we determined that families were actually the solution.
And this is sort of where children's rights came in to say to the state, and really to litigate the state to fix this system.
And we took on all these structures that were harming kids and demanded accountability.
Children's rights had the same goals I did.
Yes.
They wanted good things for kids.
Yeah.
I wanted good things for kids.
There were a number of really deep structural defects in the child welfare system in Tennessee when we investigated and brought this case.
If you've got residential facilities and you congregate kids that have problems, and if they don't have big problems when they get there, they will have when they leave.
There's significant research around the country that shows that clearly, if you place a young person in an institutional setting for a long period of time, the likelihood of them returning successfully to their family is poor. And so it's very, very evident that you want to try to keep as many young people as possible safely in their own home, and if not in their own home, in a foster home.
And we know that children, if they are to be healthy and do well, they must have a family to grow up into a successful adulthood.
This may seem like this is just a few kids in some people's minds. And so why should we spend so much money on just a few kids? The consequences of not doing that are catastrophic at times.
So you start looking at the cost that it takes to place children in congregate care facilities that we know don't do right by them, and the science tells us isn't always the best placement for them, or when they age out of a system that most often than not sees them homeless within the first few years of aging out of a system, or sees them unemployed, or sees them pregnant too early on in their young adult lives. These are indicators of not very much success. So one would imagine that we'd try to sort of flip the script on that and try to invest deeply on the front end so that our young people do not have to experience this. And when I think about children's rights, I think about them as a key actor in holding governments and other nonprofit direct providers to account for the way in which services are provided to children, youth, and families in this country.
The litigation really focused the attention of the governor and the legislature, and they understood that there were challenges and problems within the system, and that if kids were going to get the kind of care that they absolutely need, that everybody was going to have to work together to bring those resources to bear.
What we saw happen here was early on in the case, there was less fighting and more coming to the table by state officials to say, we know just how broken it is. Let's spend our time working with you all to fix it, rather than endless years in expense and delay in fighting it. And so we went pretty quickly to a settlement table, and it took a good year and a half to hammer it out, and it was very arm's length, and we didn't always agree on stuff. We had a mediator, we had experts in the room, and we hammered out a settlement.
And I do think having that settlement agreement that supported what it was we wanted to do and knew that we needed to do was extremely important and helpful to us through that process.
Yes.
It gave us the kind of backup that we need.
Iowa led the charge to close the prep school, and it was a major step in us recognizing it was a problem, and it's very unpopular at the time. So, I mean, the legislature didn't understand it. The general public didn't understand it because they thought it was quality care.
Because when I wanted to do things that I knew were in the best interest of children, but I had pushback because of political connections, I could say, I'm just so very sorry. But that Brian A. lawsuit
right there.
It's a federal lawsuit. They're going to make me do it.
Well, we would have never done that in Tennessee if it hadn't been for the lawsuit. And, you know, people ignore that, but I mean, that's a fact.
And so when an organization like Children's Rights, on behalf of a group of children, sues a state, they do so not frivolously, they do so based on extraordinary data and research.
The narrative of the case is that this system is broken and putting all 10,000 kids who are in foster care or come into the system at risk of really, really egregious harms. And the way you were able to put a case like that together and mount it is you ask the court for class action status. And the way you do that is you identify a handful of children who collectively represent all of the failings. And we identified 9 or 10 kids who we said represented all of the kids in the system. So we're here in Memphis, Tennessee. We're visiting the home of Danielle Cash, a young woman who I intersected with almost 20 years now through the Tennessee civil rights lawsuit.
Children's Right contacted our agency coming to Tennessee. They wanted to identify potential plaintiffs. And that was really easy because we were already working with many foster parents who had come to our agency trying to get us to help them access services and resources for the children that were in their home.
So here we are, 15, 20 years after I met you guys, just kind of talking through, thinking about all the stuff you all been through that kind of ran alongside this big lawsuit that we brought in Tennessee to try to fix broken stuff in the foster care system.
There are two ways that we start a campaign. One is our own research. We're constantly monitoring what's going on in the many states and the federal government as it regards children's issues. But the other piece is really from stakeholders on the ground, grassroots organizations.
When they filed the original pleadings, they used a lot of data that came from the Commission on Children and Youth, because at that time we reviewed cases of children who were in state custody to identify what was working well and to identify the challenges and the needs for improvement in the system. And those findings, along with the report from the Comptroller's Office, made their way into the pleadings.
Our objective is really to bring people together and to bring government together to do right by kids. And so in the first instance, we seek to collaborate with states and localities. And that's really the case in Tennessee. It was adversarial at first, but over time, it became a very collaborative relationship.
The Technical Assistance Committee viewed it as part of their role. And I viewed that as particularly important to kind of create those relationships and make sure that the parties could essentially problem solve.
And the first thing you have to do if you're going to make that work is a really good needs assessment so that you know what you need where.
As you begin to do the work, and particularly in Tennessee, the whole process became less adversarial because there was understanding that there was agreement about the goals of the lawsuit, at least as time went on, understanding that there was agreement about what needed to be changed, leadership at various times in the department who were open, who were willing to share and be honest about what was working and what was not working.
The TAC, which was providing the technical assistance, to develop monitoring reports. And those monitoring reports covered the over 130 provisions in the settlement agreement. Everything from how long did it take for a child to achieve permanency, to how often siblings visited, what was our foster care recruitment process.
The way to ensure that you have a successful foster home is first do an extensive background check. Then after the background check, you want to follow up with extensive training. And during the training process, you really get to know the family very well. It's usually about 40 to 80 hours of training, depending on the young person and the needs of the young person that they're responsible for.
Pearlie, how long you been doing foster parenting? Tennessee, when did you start
was in foster parents for 25 years.
Wow, and how many kids would you say you've cared for in and out of your home through doing that?
At least 80.
80?
At least.
Wow.
It's hard work, but you got to be dedicated. And look what I turned out with.
Right. So and then Danielle came into your life when, around?
She was 3 days old.
3 days old. Okay.
Yeah, she was 3 days old, and I never forget it. I was cooking, and the social worker brought her out here. So I took a drawer at the dresser and put a pillow in there, and put her in that drawer and put on the washing machine. From then on, you know, I'm still waiting on her social worker to come back, and there was no social worker. And I went to nursing school, so I would know how to handle, you know, whatever medical fragile baby they gave me. We didn't cover that. So
Well, you needed help.
I needed help, so through the night I'm up running to the fire department because this baby looked like she's finna die, and oh Lord, I didn't want no baby to die in my home. And that's when I wasn't authorized to give the doctors permission to work on her because I was just a babysitter and she belonged to the state.
So and I remember this because we even put it in the complaint that we filed against the state that I think it was
6 years,
no visit,
no
nothing.
visitor. They didn't even know if this child was dead or alive.
After you match the family with the young person, you want to have staff in there regularly to really interview and get to know the family, get to know the young person well, and make sure they're being successful in that home. It's a very difficult job. I've had 2 foster children myself. It takes a tremendous amount of work, but there's so many wonderful families out there that care for these young people and often adopt these young people when they're available for adoption.
The only thing I remember was going to the courthouse and getting adopted. That's really the only thing I remember.
You remember meeting me?
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, yeah, but.
What was so powerful about your story, here was a situation where you had, luckily, a safe and loving home where there was an interest in adopting, and the oversight by the system was so bad that no one had come around for 6 or more years.
And we found that most of these kids who lived on this campus had family who wanted them, family who not just wanted them, but asked for them.
And oftentimes had been looking
for
them and had no idea where they were.
You had been freed and ready to be adopted for like 5 years when I met you.
Right.
And yet no one was supporting your interest or giving what you need to possibly do that as a permanent and forever parent. And that was going on for thousands of kids all over the state.
I'm still to this day thinking about it, like just trying to figure out like why God placed me in this position.
The fact that you guys were able to get that done in the first few years of the lawsuit and then have that be a voice for so many thousands of other kids is a big deal.
To keep your hand on that pulse, it's the training, it's the staff, it's the technology, it's the finances. Because we, as part of the lawsuit, kept increasing the per diem that we provided to foster parents so that they could function as well as they possibly could.
one of the biggest changes in the system from the lawsuit was, one is they brought the caseloads way down for caseworkers, so they're actually know where all the kids are, because you remember they didn't even know where all the kids were, and the training is better, and they're visiting kids, and they're able to work with families towards faster reunification, getting home kids safely with their parents whenever that's safe and possible, and those numbers have gone through the roof since the case was filed. And then for kids who can't be safely returned home, it's giving permanent loving homes to adopt, which is most often foster parents.
When I went into foster care, I found the love that no one has given me. I found support. I found individual one-on-one from others.
After I was removed from that home, I actually had a lot of mentors, a lot of people that helped me become the person that I am today.
My foster parents, I call them Grandma and Grandpa. They were actually the first lady and pastor of our church that we were attending. So they saw our situation and decided that they would take all of us, including my child. Because if they didn't take us, it would have been a three-way split. My sisters would have went with a family, I would have went with a family, and my child would have went with a family. So they decided to keep us all together, so we stayed with them.
The experience of growing up in a family is what prepares you for being independent as an adult. So in my mind, it's incalculable what that means to a child.
My grandparents, when she was helping me raise my child, she taught me how to bathe, potty train. She taught me how to sew, cook, clean, bake, wash, all the independent living skills that I would need to live alone.
Well, the first couple of foster homes, they were pretty much like the same one that I left, and they reminded me of that same foster home. But the third one, it was more of like family, it was love, it was treating the children equal, it was actually spending the stipend that they get for the children towards me, and just anything that I would ask for that she would be willing to give me. She took me on a cruise, she bought me things for my graduation, she made sure my hair, my nails, my dress, everything was prepared. So that definitely opened my eyes, and I'm actually living with her right now, so.
What was the piece of it in your growing up in your mom's home that made it special and safe for you? What, if you were to describe that, what was it? Was it that you just were always around each other? There was always a sense that you were safe? Like, how would you describe that? Like, what made it positive for you?
I think it was really her, just like her treating us all the same, and you know, her showing the same attention to each one of us, no favoritism or nothing like that. She just basically like love us like she was our biological parent.
I believe the first thing that brought me back to life was when my granddad, my foster parent, he took me to the mall for the first time, and I didn't know what to do. But he was so patient and loving with me and just showing me what to do and showing me how to talk to the representative to get my shoe size. And that really showed me that somebody cares. Not everybody is out to hurt me.
And of course, as a 13-year-old, you are afraid and scared because you don't know what to expect, from your foster parents. Looking back, over the lifespan of being in foster care for 5 years, I was given the love that no one else was giving me by a complete stranger.
When I came back from the shoe store, I didn't know what love was. So as they was trying to love me, not being able to recognize it, it was a little scary until I learned to distinguish the difference between abuse and people want to care for me. They would actually sit down and talk to me. And so that started to allow me to open up. And my granddad, he would listen to my abuse stories without judgment, and would just encourage me to just go on, and that doesn't define me, and to be something great in my life.
I chose to make a stand in my life. Like, I wanted to be better than my biological mom. I wanted to be better than my dad. I wanted to be able to be better, period. I wanted to give my kids something I didn't have. So you make a choice, like, either I'm gonna live, like they want me to live, or I'm gonna, do what I need to do to make it. And that's what I did. I decided to do what I need to do to make it.
I'm focusing towards like the positive things in life, that I'm still here, I have a job, you know, I'm a college student, like the blessings that come afterwards.
Looking back on it, I think foster care is really good for kids. I think that kids can grow from it and become something greater.
The big picture over 20 years is they've completely transformed this system. They've done exactly what we asked them to do and what they agreed to do in this really large settlement. And that was a lot. They really fixed and turned around and showed durable change with data and results in really dozens and dozens of core areas that profoundly affect the lives of kids and families that the agency serves.
This work is never done. So this is an important milestone, but it doesn't mean we've solved the problem.
I feel good about it, to be able to show them the possibility that we don't have to rely on congregate care in child welfare. We can find families for kids. We can do it, and this is an example of what the possibilities are in child welfare.
It was really the best work. Excuse me. It was really the best work of my life because we had struggled so long with this issue. And we were successful. People beginning to realize that these kids have got a life too.
Children's rights has made a lasting impact, protecting hundreds of thousands of vulnerable children, and is now poised to help millions more. For the Visionaries, I am Sam Waterston.
Visionaries is brought to you through the generosity of Alice Rosenwald Fund, the Rick and Nancy Moskowitz Foundation, Winkler Family Foundation, St. Joseph's Indian School, the Ferry Family Charitable Foundation, the Episcopal Diocese of Western Massachusetts, Bill and Helen Close Charitable Fund B, Boston Private, Jonathan and Janie Kravitz, Lori A. Martin and Christopher Eisgruber, Mintz Levin, Open Society Foundations, the San Francisco Foundation, Watchell Lipton Rosen and Katz, First Hawaiian Bank, American Savings Bank, Central Pacific Bank, and Bank of Hawaii, as well as Beth and Brian Levine, Daniel and Eric Mandelblatt, Kara and Scott Friedman, Surdna Foundation, Diane and Charles Smith, Elizabeth Moore, John H. Beisner, KLM Foundation, Pilgrims, the Biela Foundation, the California Endowment, Wayne and Debbie Maycomber, with additional support by the following.